Hello, I'm William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist. The Exorcist is a film about the mystery of faith, and I think the fact that it's endured for more than 25 years now is due in large part to what it leaves you with after you've seen the film. It starts with a brilliant screenplay from an equally powerful novel by William Peter Blatty, and it's a story that can perhaps make you question your own value system, even your own sanity, because it strongly and realistically tries to make the case for spiritual forces in the universe, both good and evil. But what you may not be aware of is the fact that The Exorcist is based on a true story. It took place in Silver Spring, Maryland in 1949 and was widely reported by the American press. When I saw the files at Georgetown University pertaining to the actual case, I knew that this was going to be, or needed to be, something more than just another horror film. This had to be a realistic film about inexplicable events. I've always thought that a film should first of all be an emotional experience. It should make you laugh or cry or be scared. But it should also inspire and provoke you and make you reflect. Over the years, I think that most people take out of The Exorcist what they bring to it. If you believe that the world is a dark and evil place, then The Exorcist will reinforce that. But if you believe that there is a force for good that combats and eventually triumphs over evil, then you will be taking out of the film what we tried to put into it.
We meant to make a good movie. We meant to make a scary movie. But I had no idea that it was going to be that good or that scary.
The effect was really searing on a lot of people because this wasn't just The Omen, it wasn't just Rosemary's Baby. It had a psychological, religious impact.
It's not a film about Dracula. It's not a film about the alien. It is a film about people who live up the street. It's about a real street in a real town with real people living in it, in the house, and upstairs on the third floor of this house is a real little girl who happens to be possessed by a demon.
The film kind of, from being a horror film, became kind of a phenomenon, testing people's stamina. And you heard people saying that I was there, and when I was there, there were 3 people who fainted and were carried out, and there were one at my side who threw up.
I was as much watching what was going on, not believing that the world, that people could react in that way. I mean, I was like, why are they reacting? It's a movie.
The film delivers to this very day that very precious commodity, a powerful emotional response. Well, whether it's positive or negative, doesn't matter. It's a response. You were alive during those 2 hours. I started writing The Exorcist because I frankly was unemployed. Comedy writing, which was my forte, and exclusively, had dried up. So I thought, all right, I have nothing better to do, and I might prove that I can write respectably in another medium. I had no concept whatever of what was to come. Well, in 1949, I believe I was a junior at Georgetown University. And in class, I heard some details about a so-called case of possession and an exorcism that was going on somewhere nearby. Apparently, branding, such as the Help Me in The Exorcist, in the film, would appear all over this boy's body. Sometimes visual depictions of a face. On his back, also on the back, I believe, were the words spite and hell. The boy was of a Lutheran family. And the family had gone to their minister, who told them, let the boy stay in my house overnight. Well, all hell broke loose in that man's home. He then said, look, I don't know what to tell you about this. The Catholics claim to be able to deal with that sort of thing. When I first heard about this case, it struck me immediately that if one can demonstrate credibly the existence of evil spirits, now we're into spirits. I mean, if there are devils or demons, there can be angels, and at the very least, a spiritual dimension to intelligence. My exploration, looking back on it now, didn't occur to me at the time, but my exploration of this subject matter and digging and digging and digging to find proof that, yes, this happened. This wasn't made up. This occurred, and we have no explanation for it. No one has yet to offer an explanation for it based upon the material universe. And that was all grounded in the terror of total obliteration of death. That's what that was all about. I mean, it was a personal pilgrimage of my own. Many, many, many years later, it all came back to me, and I determined to write that story. Now I was intimidated. Oh, I'm writing something serious now. Father Tom Birmingham, who was in the film and was the technical advisor, taught me in high school. Anyway, I went to him looking for help.
So I said, well, I'll work with you then if, on one condition, that you take it seriously. I don't want another Rosemary's Baby. I want somebody that really will confront the awesome problem of the evil in God's world. So we worked for a year before he wrote the first page.
Now, I'd written women in comedies, but I'd never written a woman in a real solid story. And so I cast about him, who do I want? I don't want someone who looks as though she might be a Stepford wife or was brought up in Salem. I want someone like my good friend, Shirley MacLaine. Here's a woman who is bright, and yet, in a way, she is just as ordinary as a supermarket shopping cart. So that you will not be prepared for this person to have a child who is possessed, or whom she claims may be possessed. Novel is one thing where the imagination can work. But you put it on the screen and you objectify. I mean, this story was begging to be a flop and could easily have turned into a laugh riot. Every studio passed. They were just afraid. I wasn't sure there was a movie in it. I thought, this needs an honest director that is not Catholic, that is agnostic on the subject, and can give this incredible story such a sense of documentary reality that it will work. I had seen The French Connection, and I wanted Billy Friedkin. And the Warner Brothers then grudgingly agreed.
After I was finally signed to direct the film, Bill said to me, now I have to tell you I have a great surprise. Here is my screenplay. And I took it home and eagerly read through it, and I thought it was not very good. I thought it was overwrought. I thought that it was filled with a lot of symbolism and underlined, and it wasn't the novel. I thought those adaptations he made were unnecessary, and I believed in the novel, which I told him, and I then took the copy of the book that he sent me and I marked it up with passages that I felt we could film.
Every night he would reread the novel, and he'd make these notes, and he'd come in and he'd say, I think we ought to start with this scene, then go to that scene and that scene. And we went through the whole book that way.
I was handed this cast by fate. Burstyn, for example. The studio wanted either Jane Fonda at that time, Audrey Hepburn, or Anne Bancroft. Jane Fonda, she said, why would I want to be involved with a capitalist rip-off piece of shit like this? She was in her anti-Vietnam phase. In the meantime, I got a call out of the blue from Ellen Burstyn. I had seen her in the last picture show, where she was very good in a small part. She said, well, I want to do Chris McNeil. I said, well, I have to tell you that, the studios offered it out to 3 other actresses. They want a star. And she said, I understand all that, but she said, I think I'm destined to play this part, so I'd love to meet you.
He said, all right, I'll tell you, I'm not going to keep you dangling. It's between you and he mentioned another actress. And he said, and I'm flying to New York tonight to see her.
But by this time, I realized that Burstyn was so supremely intelligent, understood what we were doing.
He called me from New York and said, all right, you've got the part. And I said, oh, you saw her? And he said, no, I ran into her in the deli last night and she looked like hell. And I said, well, Billy, that's not fair. I look like hell in the deli too. And he said, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles.
There were hundreds, if not thousands, of young women looked at for the part of Reagan.
I was a working child actor in New York doing modeling and commercials.
She was not even recommended by her agency. They had recommended about 30 or 40 other of their clients for that role, not Linda Blair. Linda Blair's mother brought her in on her own.
And Mother says to me, she said, we have an interview for a movie. And it's like, oh, really? Because movies, that was still exciting. I didn't grow up in Hollywood. So I went in and met with the casting people. They gave me the dialogue, which was, like a paragraph of the worst language you could ever imagine. And so I went in and read this filth. And when I was done, I went downstairs and I was like, how am I going to tell Mom about this? What? I can't tell her what I just had to say.
I then decided to film this one scene. It was in an empty sound stage. The studio saw it, and they, since there were no star names involved with a 12-year-old girl, if I believed in her, go ahead. And the thing is that she is perfect.
Then he would have meetings where he'd ask me to start acting out things like, okay, now what I want you to do is, get on the couch and writhe around in pain. Well, I was embarrassed. I was just embarrassed. And that's really what it was. He wanted to see how stable I was. So he realized I was very stable, went to a public school. I'm a Christian, and in my religion, we never discussed the devil. So to me, it was a fictitious character like people think of Frankenstein or something like that. It wasn't real to me.
There were a lot of actors who wanted to play Karras in The Exorcist. Jack Nicholson wanted to play the part, Paul Newman, everybody, almost every male star in Hollywood. But I didn't want a known actor. What I was really looking for was a priest who could act.
He came to see my play that championship season on Broadway.
And I felt that it just reeked of failed Catholicism.
I said, you want me to do the screenplay, right? He said, no. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to do a screen test for Father Karras. I said, you what?
And it was incredible. The camera loved him. Von Sydow, I think, was the finest screen actor of that day from his films with Ingmar Bergman. Blatty had told me that the person he had in mind for this character was the French Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin, and it's Max von Sydow to me.
Of course, my approach was colored by my, say, Protestant upbringing. To me, the devil has never been scary. I was brought up with Scandinavian fairy tales and folk tales, and in many of those, the devil is kind of ridiculous. He's always a loser. Of course, I was totally aware of the fact that Father Merrin, he believes, important whatever my personal or private opinions were.
When I met with him, I realized how young he actually was. He had often played older in Bergman films, so we knew it was going to be a lot of makeup for him, but he was like a guaranteed performance.
I had to ask permission from the provincial, and he kind of rolled his eyes toward heaven and said, well, why not? And he had read the script, so he knew that it was really trying to say something significant about religion. It wasn't just, a scary movie. It was a movie that was talking about evil.
It deals with very heavy forces, and I was a little worried about what that would mean to work with those.
Of course, on a 15-month schedule, as we had, you certainly expect the laws of probability would presume that certain things would happen. But in my 32 years of making films, I've never had a set burn down. And we did on The Exorcist.
We had a fire that still a mystery.
The set caught on fire one weekend when no one was there.
I remember that was terrible. Shut down. I think it shut us down for about 6 weeks.
They couldn't find an electrical problem. They couldn't find an arsonist. They couldn't find any substantial reason that occurred.
When I was filming, I would go to this little restaurant, which was in the Jesuit quarters, and sit there and study my lines. I was in there one day, and this very, very old priest, he handed me this little medal of the Blessed Virgin. He said, "You know why I'm giving you this?" I said, "Why?" He said, "I'm going to tell you something about intervention. Did you ever hear the concept of intervention?" I said, "No." He said, "It's a Gnostic concept. It comes out of the 15th century. If you do anything on the devil, anything at all on the devil, to reveal him as the trickster that he is, he will seek retribution against you. Or he will even try to stop what you're trying to do, to unmask him." And he said, "This medal will protect you." He said, be very careful, you take care of yourself." Maybe about 3 days later, it's kind of catacombed there, the Jesuit estates. And they have all these side rooms, like little sitting rooms, maybe 4 or 5 of them when you walk down the hall. So I'm walking down the hall going to dinner one night, and I walk by, and on the periphery of my mind, I said, "Did I see a casket in there?" And I walk back, and I look in the room, and there's this old priest in a casket, dead.
Just through attrition, I think there was 3 or 4 people died.
There were a couple of unfortunate deaths during the filming.
There were 9 deaths, which is an enormous amount of deaths connected with the film. Some very directly, like the actor Jack McGowan, who gets killed in the film, completed shooting, and died.
It's very simple. If you have a production that lasts 2 weeks or 3 weeks, nothing happens. But if you have a production that lasts for a year or 9 months, a lot of things have to happen. Accidents one way or the other.
Max von Sydow's brother died. The assistant cameraman whose wife had a baby during the shoot, the baby died. The man who refrigerated the set died. The young black night watchman.
And these weren't casualties from stunts or things like that. These were kind of men standing behind a camera all of a sudden, dropping dead.
Of course, it always makes for great stories about what happens, if it was cursed or whatever.
It's very good for publicity. If you don't believe in devil, you don't believe in curses. Simple.
Then Friedkin called me and said, "Would you come down and exorcise the set?" I said, "No, Billy, no. I don't want to increase anxiety or anything like that. And we probably are not dealing with anything more than accidents of one kind or another. But what I will do is think of something else." So then I said, "What am I going to do?" I said, "Well, I guess they want me to do a Catholic thing." So I went down and I told them all, everybody was there, including the Teamsters, and Max von Sydow had just arrived. And so I gave them a blessing, and then I said, "Now I'm going to give you my own view of what it's like to do exactly what everybody in this room is doing. All of us are made in the image and likeness of God, and we all mirror him in some way. And what all of you are doing is marvelous. You mirror the creativity of God."
I designed the film so that there would be blazingly bright scenes, as in Iraq, and then there would be these dark scenes in the attic and the exorcism room. and that the whole film would, in a way, alternate between the forces of dark and light in a kind of literal way.
The Kennedys live there. It's filled with important people, congressmen, government people, writers, etc.
And I knew instantly that this was cinematic as hell, especially in the fall when we shot there, with the leaves falling and nice breezes that came and went unexpectedly.
There were 97 hard stone steps. It looked like forever going down there. And so I went out and I got all the rubber I could find, 1/2 inch, and I lined every one of those steps with rubber.
And all the Georgetown kids, with the little capitalists that they are, they got the roofs of all the people around there on top of the roofs, and they sold tickets for $5 a head so you could watch the stuff.
I remember when we were preparing for the film, Billy was going to art museums and looking through art books and finding images that inspired him. And that famous shot that was used in the ad of Mark standing looking at the house, I think, although the composition is different, it was inspired by a Magritte. And of course, the thing in Magritte is that it's always very truthful, but then there's this oddness that happens within the realism.
That shot was conceived by Billy and Owen Roisman, our cameraman, to be something extraordinary.
The shaft of light does everything. It's like an ethereal quality to it. The fact that he's silhouetted in it, the graphics of it, the whole thing, it just feels very spiritual and very ethereal.
First of all, you wanted to see these things happen as realistically as possible. I knew of no way to achieve these effects realistically with opticals in the state they were in then. Today, it would be a piece of cake. Today, they can make you believe that the Titanic is sinking. In those days, I could not, with an optical, make you believe that a bed was thumping on its own. It had to happen on the set, and it was a case of trial and error.
Marcel Vercateur, the special effects man, who was brilliant, he conceived and designed all those effects so that you couldn't see anything. I mean, everything was built in. They're just amazing.
He was a strange soul, like me, an experimenter and a perfectionist.
We started off with one particular thing, just elevating the bed like. So what I did was put enough weight and leverage behind to raise the bed. Then I pulled it back down again. So the bed was trying to fly, but it couldn't because I was pulling it back. It really worked well. But anyways, we got so many things that I built another bed, and then I built another bed. So I had 3 beds. The room itself was sitting on 8 pneumatic wheels in order to create the earthquake.
It's a rigging that Marcel Vercateur came up with that was a mold of my back, and it was like a hard metal. And then they had like a brace around my stomach, and then it was laced up on the sides.
I had her completely strapped in, and I had her.
It was actually manually pumped by some big men on the other side of the wall.
She started screaming.
I didn't know what to do. And so I'm just yelling, it hurts really, really, and somebody thought I yelled Billy. And I actually never broke character.
I had a rig around my midriff with a wire coming out the back, and the stuntman was pulling me.
So we took her back the first time, and it was a good shot. And Billy said, we're going to do it again.
I said, Billy, he's pulling me too hard. I can get hurt. And Billy said, well, it has to look real. I said, I understand, but I'm telling you, I could get hurt. And the stuntman was standing there listening to this, and Billy said to him, okay, don't pull her so hard. But as I turned away, I felt them exchange a look.
And he said, give it to her this time. And I said, really? And he says, give it to her. And this is Ellen Burstyn, right? She's a nice lady. And so I said, okay. So when I hauled off, she came completely off her feet.
You see me hit and you see me reach for my back. I screamed in horrendous pain. Billy motioned to Owen to tilt the camera down on me. And I saw it, and I was so furious and said, turn the effing camera off, because I couldn't stand that he was willing to just get a quick shot of it before they called the ambulance, you know.
Well, it was a very difficult film. Billy was reaching for the limit. He was committed to it, and he was obsessed by it himself, and that obsession was contagious.
He knew what to do with this film from the minute that he read the book. And it was his vision, so all of us just participated by doing what he wanted.
Billy didn't kid around. When he said he liked something, he really liked it, you see. He never flattered.
And he knew how to make each one of us work. And that in itself was very interesting, because I got to watch everything from the bed.
And you never knew when he was going to explode or not explode. So there was always a tension on the set.
Billy can be totally irascible. Billy has reduced me to tears on more than one occasion.
But he also liked to stimulate the actors. So he would sometimes shoot off a gun or something when he wanted someone to look startled.
And that's really what pissed me off. And I told him, I said, never do that again. You know, I'm an actor. I don't need all these artificial stimulants.
Well, the actors got used to this. And they'd come in the morning, and I had a good relationship with them. And like Max would walk in and say, good morning, Owen. Where are the guns this morning? I said, well, there's a .45 behind that wall and a shotgun behind that one. I said, thank you very much.
Well, I enjoyed very much working with him. Although it was, he used maybe sometimes methods that I was not used to.
My dear friend Billy Friedkin is a maniac, and I love him, but he's a maniac.
Billy would do anything to motivate an act. After Jason Miller dies, when Father Bill goes in to give him the last rites, we did 13 takes, 15 takes, 17 takes, I'm not quite sure.
Bill Friedkin wanted Father Dyer to react in some emotional way. This is his best friend, lying there in a pool of blood.
And Father Bill could never get it right.
So Billy comes over to me and says, Bill, you're just doing this by the numbers.
He was a non-actor. He couldn't emote.
And I said, Billy, I have just given my best friend the last rites 15 times in one night, and it's now 2:30 in the morning.
Friedkin and I had a little signal that we'd use to silently roll the camera and sound. And he asked me at this time to do just that.
And he said, I understand. He said, do you trust me? Well, you always trust somebody unless they ask you.
And Billy went in and slapped him across the face.
He belted me right across the chops and backed off. And I went in the scene, and if you look at that carefully, when I'm giving the last right, my hand's going like that. And I wasn't making my hand go like that. That was sheer nerve juice.
He was tough, but it was very stimulating. He drove me to some of the best work that I'd done up to that time. A makeup artist gets a great thrill changing someone's face because, in a sense, he is creating a new living creature. I was faced with the problem of making this 12-year-old little girl, very pretty little girl with apple cheeks and a butterball nose, make her into a demon. And it was an incredible challenge.
God bless Dick Smith. Certainly nothing could have prepared anybody for what that experience was going to be. First, he had to do the casting of the face. He created different makeups, which we tested.
I think it was 6 all different makeups. The very first one I did was a all-out witchy makeup with a black wig and bushy eyebrows, and it was terrible. But it proved one thing, and that was that I could take this round face and make it look pretty horrible. So then it was a matter of kind of backtracking, and I tried. There were several other more moderate makeups. There was one that seemed to be promising. We filmed it, and Billy said, it's no good. It doesn't work. And the reason, I had to agree, the reason it didn't work was because the dialogue of the other people in the scene didn't match this horror.
One day I had the thought that the disfiguration that results in her face should come from something that Reagan did to herself. And I thought, what if in the scene where she's masturbating with a crucifix, we see that her whole face is streaming with blood fresh blood, as though she had used the crucifix to scar herself.
The makeup, once established, progressed. And here she's got even more wounds and stuff on her face. I had to keep making it worse. The cuts became kind of raised welts or scars, but I placed them very strategically.
Almost like nightmarish shapes, but all growing out of the idea that she scarred herself with the crucifix, and these are gangrenous sores.
And I changed her mouth. I thickened the upper lip, and I gave her a thick, distorted, cracked lower lip that kind of drooped over to one side, and that twisted her mouth.
And then he took a cast of my tongue. And so this, it was fit on my tongue perfectly, and it was just, I just had to ball it all up and stick it in my mouth. But I mean, it's horrible in the movie. It is, I admit. That's just a horrible, horrible thing to look at.
And of course, the contact lenses were the other key thing. And Linda could never get used to them. So I had to put anesthetizing drops in her eyes before putting them in.
The big ones, the ones that whited out my eyes, were actually the most comfortable of all of them.
I was concerned for Linda. I think we all were kind of concerned because she was young and innocent and not into this thing at all.
She was just a kid that liked an ice cream soda in between and would laugh, and as soon as you said roll it, boom, she turned on this demon.
Her capability at that age of handling what she went through was remarkable, totally remarkable.
There were various different effects that had to be done in the script, and one of them was the head turning around backwards. The only way to do it was to make a dummy and have a mechanical head.
We sat down together, and Dick says, if you'll do everything on the inside, I'll do everything on the outside.
The head and the torso are rigid plastic because the head had to rotate smoothly.
We decided we were going to try it out, so put it in the front seat of a taxi in the summertime in New York City.
The head would wobble around, so it would look like it was alive.
And the people would stare at this thing, and then finally it would just spin its head around, and that was it. And then tell the cab, get out of here.
And of course, how do you make breath show in a room? Today they can draw it in digitally. It's rather expensive, but it's less expensive than what we did.
I got a hold of this refrigeration fella, and I built this giant cocoon.
So we had 4 massive air conditioners, which we found we had to turn on all night. And by the time we got to the set the next morning, it was 30 or 40 below zero.
He wanted to see the breath of the actors, and I think also in the back of his mind, he decided that the extreme cold would really influence the performance as well.
It was difficult to act and express facially emotions when your face was frozen, literally.
The perspiration was freezing on my hair was frozen.
One morning, we had a lovely surprise. We came in and found that there was like a thin, thin layer of snow over the entire set. Somehow, a lot of moisture had gotten into the atmosphere, and it had condensed.
Was it cold? Yes. Did I like it? Not much. It's probably why I hate cold so much nowadays. I was cold, yeah.
The head of production of Warner Brothers came in from time to time, flew in to see why it was taking us so long to do this, and he would stand in the back of the set just shaking his head with his mouth. He couldn't believe, and no one really could believe this was going on or that would ever produce anything like a believable result.
We approached The Exorcist not like a horror film. It was more of a combination of Billy Friedkin's background of being a documentarian as well as a theater, a director, and a live director. We kind of knew each other's rhythms. The film really dictated what the pace was going to be. Nowadays, you would consider it almost slow. It would be slow and methodic, and all of a sudden, things would happen, and it would just, all hell would break loose. And the film doesn't feel long because it's constantly bombarding you with things, and then it would let you breathe, and then it would bombard you again.
I felt that the sound could have a dynamic that swung between loud, very loud, oppressive noises and total dead silence.
I don't think there was anything like it, sound-wise, up to that point where everything was just super exaggerated.
It took 16 weeks to make this track, and we did a lot of experimentation with various noises.
You just play it against the picture and see what happens, you know, and create what we call the mohawk, which is the mohawk is like when two dogs see one another and all of a sudden the hair goes up on the back of their neck, bad vibes. And well, there's certain music that does that. There's certain sounds that do that.
The original composer was Lalo Schifrin, and Billy Friedkin had brought Lalo in to screen the film.
And there was a lot of pretentious ooga booga about, the kind of presence or feeling or vibe that the music was supposed to have.
Lalo said, "Trust me, it'll be wonderful." So he went away and he wrote the score of The Exorcist.
When the time came, it was like, I don't know how many people were out there, like, 100 of LA's finest musicians strike up the band.
And anyhow, Lalo's sitting there with his chest out, and they play this score. It's a beautiful score, but it was all over. It was kind of a silence.
And it was like, get this brand X Stravinsky out of here. I mean, he went ape shit. Billy did.
So they stopped the recording right in the middle. I mean, you have 110 guys standing there, and you just say, go home.
And fired him right there on the spot with his wife and his agent and everybody. I mean, it was like that's it.
And Billy says, give me that music. So we took the music off the recorder, handed it to him. He ran out in the front of the Tadeo and threw it across the street into the parking lot. He said, that's where that music belongs.
Billy said to me, did you ever hear of a record called Tubular Bells? I said, yeah, Mike Oldfield. He says, go up and get that.